without further ado, Ann Pardilla.
It does a heart good to see your son. I know you all feel that, mothers, grandmothers, to see somebody standing up and talking about Native people. I'm very traditional. Oops. I'm not as tall, I'm shrinking. I know some of you is probably happening the same way. I used to be 5'10". I like to share. When I like to do a prayer, and I know we're in school, but in Native country, we have no separation from church and state, eh? Yanigaway, yanigaway, yanigaway. Yanigaway, yanigaway, yanigaway. Yanigaway, yanigaway, yanigaway. Yanigaway, yanigaway, yanigaway. I did what they call the medicine circle, the medicine wheel. In the East, I pray for all children of the universe, red, yellow, black, and white. I go to the South. I pray for all women, red, yellow, black, and white. We women don't lift each other up, eh? We pull each other down. We don't lift each light up. There's something wrong with us. And then I go to the West, and I pray for all men, red, yellow, black, and white. And I think men need to look and see the woman as an equality, the same. The Creator did not make you by yourself without woman. And in the country of Indian women, they were equal until the domination came and looked at us women because we were very free and gave us very embarrassing names. I look to the North for all elders. I pray for all elders, red, yellow, black, and white.
I'm Norma Jean Salas, part of the Pardilla clan, Yahoo! And I'm the oldest sibling of Aunt Pardilla, and there are 6 of us. And I have the honor of being the oldest, but as time goes on and my brothers are graying, I like to think of them as being a little bit older than I. It was always something that Mom and I did. Mom looked younger for her age than she was, and so she just stayed 39. And I heard her say that over the years many, many times, and so I thought, well, after I turned 39 and then 49 and then 59, I go, you know what, I think I'm going to stay at 39, just like my mom and.
So I am your Uncle Jerry Pardilla. Also, my birth name is Gerardo Renko Pardilla, and I am a junior. Not technically a junior in a way that my name is close to my dad's name, but his middle name is Francisco. And so the system that our grandparents used when sons were born in our family from Iloilo was to give each of the sons the mother's maiden name as a middle name. And so in following that form, my middle name is Renko, which is my mom and Irene Renko's maiden name. So I'm the only one in which that was applied. So I am Gerardo Renko Pardilla, and the given nickname of Jerry, which is very different than my dad's nickname. Same name except Francisco is the middle, but he went by George. So he was George. I'm glad I'm Jerry. I wouldn't want to have been known as Little George. So there it is. I am the eldest of the sons in the family. So in birth order, I am number 2, and I'm the first of the sons, one of 4. And then sister is Norma, the eldest, and then your mom, Lisa, as the youngest of the sisters.
My name is Jim Pardilla. I'm 3 of 6, 2 of 4. The third child of Ann and George. I'm the second son of Ann and George. So 3 of 6, 2 of 4.
I'm Lisa. I'm Ann's daughter. I'm number 5 of 6 out of the children that she has. I'm the second daughter. There's 4 boys and 2 girls.
All right. I am Jason Pardilla. And Irene is my mom. I'm the youngest of 6. So there's 17-year span. Hopefully I get that number right. I should know that by now. Between Norma and myself. So Norma, Jerry, Jimmy, David, Lisa, then myself. They're all roughly 2 years apart. Then from Lisa to myself, there's a 9-year gap. So that's where I am in the family tree.
I am a Penobscot, Kiowa, and a Maliseet Indian. My name is Canadante Sumini, and I, Pardilla. As a child, we were always protected, but not openly so. We were given our independence, but at the same time, there was someone that would be available close by if the need arose. But our life changed as they went by. Our men went to war, and our women went to work in state and out of state. In some instances, some of our mothers had to leave their children in the cares of other members of the family. I was one of those children who was raised by my grandparents. Both my grandparents worked. My grandfather, after working in the canoe shop for many years, was retired at 65. He went to Belfast and he was a demolition longshoreman. 65, can you imagine? Usually when I start, I'm saying I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a child of an alcoholic. My age is 55 and I've always worked. I'm not lazy. And they use the word lazy, but we only take what we need, so that's not lazy, eh? My grandmother worked at a canvas shop, making cases and carriers for the army. My mother was one of those women who had to go away to work. She worked making parts for airplanes. And in her spare time, she learned to become a chef. I missed her. But there were many other family members looking about for you. It was not so bad.
My mom's name is Ann Pardilla. She was born Ann Irene Ranko, and she was born in Old Town, Maine.
Would you say the year or no?
No, she never wanted to have her age revealed, so we'll just say that she's constant at 29. So
My mom's lineage is a very long narrative. Her mother, my grandmother, was Margaret Faustina Polchis, and having been married a number of times, when my mom was born, my grandmother Margaret's married surname was Ranko. And so my mom, Ann Irene, was born as a Ranko. But she does not have Ranko lineage. So her father, my grandfather, was the late Bruce John Poolah, who was a Kiowa Indian from Mountain View, Oklahoma. And he had been married into Penobscot in the days when there were Indian shows in the early part of the 20th century. And he was a rodeo performer. He was also a traditional native singer, particularly of Kiowa songs. And he traveled eastward to be part of the sportsman shows and the Indian show performances. Then that period of time, there were Penobscots who were also traveling in that period of time, performing traditional music. And this is where our relative, Lucy Nicola, had been on those circuits. And there's a biographical information about her life. But it was during that period of time when she was traveling that she met Bruce John Poolah. And they eventually married and relocated to Indian Island and established a trading post with the iconic wooden structure teepee and a moccasin shop. They had a basket making part of that set of buildings. And so this is where our grandmother, Margaret Polchis Ranko, made baskets with others who made baskets for sale in the teepee trading post. And it was there also where Bruce John Poolah, my grandfather, had a relationship with Margaret Ranko. Indian arts and crafts were part of the tourist trade. And so my mom grew up in the summers going and being part of those. Also having a Kiowa lineage, in her teen years, she would go to Oklahoma. And so she was introduced to our Kiowa relatives there. And so very mobile periods of time in her life when she was traveling to be part of her extended family in Oklahoma, here in Maine. We also have lineage from Kings Clear Reserve, known as Belich, and also traveling into New Brunswick, Canada, to be part of our extended family there.
So we have an interesting family tree, and I know it will take a little bit to explain, but we go generations back. Our family can be traced back to the first contact with the French and the English and even the Portuguese here in the Wabanaki territory. We won't start way back from there, but just suffice to say that my grandmother, Margaret Faustina Polchis, was the daughter of Gabe Polchis, who was originally from Kings Clear, New Brunswick. And my great-grandmother, Lena Polchis, was in Nicola. She was Lena Nicola from here on Indian Island. And they met, and I think there was more opportunities for my grandfather here in terms of, positions working the canoe factory and those kinds of things. And they had a nice little farm, and Indian Island had little gardens and farming at that time. And I do remember that my great-grandfather, Gabe Polchis, used to send pictures and kind of exaggerate on postcards to his relatives back in Kings Clear all the lovely vegetables and stuff that he was growing here at Old Town, because it's warmer than up near Fredericton, New Brunswick, where Kingsclear is close to. It was in one of those trips, traveling back and forth, that my grandmother, we call her Margaret. I think her real name was Marguerite, but everyone called her Margaret. She actually was born on one of those trips to visit relatives in New Brunswick, and so she had a Canadian status. And as years passed on, she actually did gain status and here in with our tribe, in the Penobscot tribe. So these are my great grandparents, and in those days, everybody would travel a lot. There was a train that went out to Bangor and actually went into New Brunswick, so that mode of travel was easier. And my mother, when she was a young girl, used to travel and spend the summers with relatives in Kingsclear. And the train went into Fredericton, and they would pick her up in Fredericton. And I remember one time, Mom said that they picked. Everybody didn't have a car in those days, so they had to borrow a car and pay money, like rent a car from somebody that had one. And the community member from Kingsclear that loaned her relatives a car. It was an old Model T, which was even outdated then, in the 40s. And she was really embarrassed to have to drive in the old Model T from Fredericton down to Kingsclear, which is, I don't know, about a 20-25 minute ride, maybe longer, in the old Model T.
The way I understand this, and my mom, your grandmother, would often tell us about our lineage. And so our grandfather, Bruce John, was one of several children born to the second wife of Kiowa George. He was called Podlok, or Old Wolf, and that name, Podlok, was transformed into what we know today as Pula. And so Old Wolf became Pula. And we have many relatives in Oklahoma and throughout Indian country that are related through Kiowa George. Kiowa George had two wives, and one of those was Tsoma. She had light-colored hair, and so her name is derived from her light-colored hair, Tsoma. And she had a number of children. And so our grandfather was born in 1903. I am told that our grandfather was part, mostly Kiowa, but part Mexican. And so the Kiowa people would adopt into their families and into the societies those individuals that were often taken during warfare or raids. And in our family history, there is the remembrance and telling of the story of Kiowas making an expedition into what we now know as Mexico. There were a number of those expeditions, and in the one in which our great grandmother, her name was, as your grandmother, my mom would say her name is Canadante, but I'm almost certain that isn't a proper Kiowa pronunciation, but I do know the translation. And her name was Howling Geese. And based upon what I know of how the Kiowas came to take Canadante as a captive, may have given rise to her name. So we have this lineage of the mestiza women, the sisters, that taken as young girls and later assimilated into Kiowa society. Very likely that they were a mix of Spanish and Tarahumara Indian from Chihuahua, Mexico. But we don't know that for sure because we haven't traced the Mexican lineage beyond what I can tell you now. So we have international or North American lineage from Canada, United States, and Mexico that we derive from. And the Kiowa tradition and the stories are that they emerged into this world through an opening. They emerged out of a hole, and whether it was a log, but there was a hole that they were emerging out into the world, and that there were many of them, but there was a pregnant woman that was trying to make her way out of the portal into this world through that hole in a tree, in a log or something like that, and she got stuck and blocked everyone else who was behind her from entering into the world where we are today. And so that we are connected to the Kiowa stories and the lineage that they emerged into this world. And there were many others that somehow that they were emerging and going beyond their extended relatives who were left behind.
But Gabe Polchis was a very loving husband and supportive with his children and grandchildren. Their house on Church Street was always filled with grandchildren. They would take care of them while their children, my grandmother Margaret, would go work down, in Massachusetts or Connecticut, and send money home. So my mother was born. Of course, my grandmother Margaret is her mom, and my grandfather is Bruce Pula. So there's a little bit of a story that goes on there, but it's for probably another day. But anyway, our heritage brings together both my grandfather Bruce Pula, who was from the Kiowa tribe in Anadarko, Oklahoma, and my grandmother Margaret, who's from Indian Island.
I know that in part of her life, part of her early life was having been labeled, as I explained to you about our grandmother Margaret Polchis Renko, having been a basket maker in the TP Trading Post business that was established by our grandfather Bruce John Pula and Lucy Nicola Pula, and that our mom was born out of an extramarital relationship that Bruce John Pula had with our grandmother. And so that was a stigma of that time in our community, but also in America, heavily influenced by very Christian views about the legitimacy of a child, which is something that shaped her early life, and it's something that she spoke to. And the story I remember her telling me is that she had felt the shame in the way that children and others would speak about her as having been born out of wedlock, and that she was illegitimate, and in the vernacular of the day, a bastard. And so my mom told me that her grandmother took her by the hand and went and walked through our community house by house and began to recite the lineage of each of the families that lived in the homes, and telling my mom that don't hang your head for anyone, that they claim to be of this lineage, that this is who they are. They too had their own secrets that people had quietly not held them to such a standard as they had applied to my own mom. And so she went house to house with our grandmother. And I suppose that would have been Lena Nicola Polches, who went house to house and telling the lineage, the claims, and also the legal lineages of the occupants in each house. And so that helped my mom get a sense that everyone has their lineages. You are here, and you have value and worth, and don't let anyone here in this community look down upon you and claim that you're less than because you were not born into a family of two wedded parents. That stays with me, and so I have no sense of embarrassment to say that my grandmother was Margaret Faustina Polches Ranko, and yes, she did have a relationship with Bruce John Pula, but we are here. And I also have come to know that in a matrilineal society have a different way of reckoning, and particularly in our traditions of being a matrilineal people, our clans are primarily determined by our mothers and our grandmothers, and that whole matrilineal lineage. And so in that cultural framework, no child is born without a clan. Therefore, there is no one that is illegitimate, which is very nurturing and very grounding to know that you are always part of a family and a system that values your worth.
I came from Indian Island where we had suppers. We had minstrel shows. People look at Indians like we were nothing. I mean, they come to the reservation still looking for leather and feathers and still in the teepees. Today, the 90s, we're going into the next century. Here, these women held pageants, displayed our traditional songs and our sacred dances. At times, we were held in Old Town, which also houses the University of Maine. That was our village. That big island there was our village. Another treaty aid. These pageants kept our heritages and culture. Then came the sportsman shows. I am too a child of the sportsman shows. They came. Our people took the advantage to sell their wares and to dance their culture. These shows were scheduled from fall to spring, from Bangor, Maine, to Portland, to Boston, to New York, to Philadelphia, to Des Moines, Iowa. I traveled those shows all my life to the age of 15 to 16.
She met and married my father at the age of 17. My parents met and got married, and they lived in Bangor, Maine. My father was stationed at Dow Air Force Base. He was Filipino, so moving to Bangor, Maine was quite the shock because he had grown up in the Philippines and ended up in Maine. He was stationed there. My sister was born in Old Town. And then my brother Jerry, he was born on Dow Air Force Base. And then my brother Jimmy was born on Dow Air Force Base. And then he got orders to go to French Morocco. He was in the Air Force. And so they moved to Africa. And my brother David was born.
Jerry and Jimmy and I had flown over to French Morocco. That was one of my father's first places that he was stationed outside of Bangor, Maine, and we really enjoyed living there. It was a great opportunity. You know, Jerry and I and Jim got to ride a camel. I think Jim recanted the other day. He can still smell the smell of the camel. I can't, but
The three of us, well, it was just Norma, Jean, Jerry, and I was the baby. Dad got stationed in Sidi Slimane, northern Morocco. These are snippets of U.S. history that aren't even in the textbooks. And it's pretty cool about Dad being at different us, and he was able to take the family to a foreign country, late 50s, early 60s, to a foreign country. And he had a baby, me, which was really cool. And like we were saying the other night, there were things, because I was just a baby, there were things that I remember of being that young that are, to this day, are still with me. Well, you heard the camel story. But there are other things that come to, mind that, like, I remember Mom and the ladies going to the Casbah. The Casbah, we're in northern Morocco. You hear stories about the end of the Silk Trade route in Casbah. That's where Mom was. End of the 50s, in the 60s. And I don't know where that picture went, but we had a picture of her and the ladies in 1950 outfits, early 60s outfits, very mod, what we would call today very like there. But it's obvious what's in the center of their, like, they're in the Casbah, they're having tea, and they're in that moment at that age, because she would have been in her late 20s, in a foreign country, and just all the smells, and with her little other military wives that had families, and they're in a foreign country, and pre-modern time, pre-cell phone. It amazes me that Mom toted, at the time, just three of us around, and we have pictures of proof that she did get out and adventure, and we have proof of pictures with her and Dad getting out and adventuring, leaving us kids home going, holy shit, we're finally away from them animals.
But there are various pieces and good things that we took about from each of those places that we lived. And like I had shared earlier, that we would come home in between, and always for about a month or more, and sometimes Mom would and us kids would stay longer, and Dad would move on to the next base and then try to get housing for us off base. So after we were in French Morocco, we were stationed in Washington State, and we lived off base in Ephrata, and that's where my sister Lisa Ann was born. It was awesome, and we had an awesome time there. We made really good friends with a farm family there, and we used to enjoy going to visit with them there. And after that, after living in Washington State, we were stationed in North Dakota, and that was very interesting. It was always colder in North Dakota than in Maine or Alaska. It's very cold there. And then we got to get out of the cold, and my father had done some changes in terms of what he was doing for the Air Force. He was an electrician, but he got to change in which field that he was working in, and we got stationed in the Philippines at Clark Air Force Base, and that was during the time of the Vietnam War. And the boys have wonderful stories because we were getting older at that point, like junior high school, and I was just started and finishing up my junior high school. So we really have really fond memories of being in the Philippines and enjoying the warm weather and taking trips off into the ocean to swim.
And so one thing I definitely remember was the time when we were moving from North Dakota to California, and we were to fly from California to the Philippines. And so we stayed at Travis Air Force Base in a housing offered on base. I can't remember exactly what it was called. Almost like it was a temporary housing for us while we were making our final arrangements to fly to the Philippines. We stayed there for a short period of time at Travis Air Force Base before we took our flights, and I definitely remember the long flights. There were 5 of us, so could you imagine traveling with 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls, on a very, very long set of flights that took us from California. I think we landed in places like Hawaii and Guam. There might have been another stop before we landed at Clark. I think it was a commercial flight, so we might have landed in Manila, at the airport in Manila. So when we moved to the Philippines, we initially lived in a subdivision, I think it was called the Pardilla subdivision, and we were in a place where there were other American families in the subdivision, just outside of the Clark Air Force Base compound, which is a very large Air Force base. It was during the Vietnam War era, and so there were many families, and there was a number of subdivisions outside of the air base where American families lived. So we lived in the Pardilla subdivision. And I can't remember, vague memory now, but I think we had a 3-bedroom home, and we lived in a subdivision that had concrete walls around it, and just beyond our subdivision, we could see out into the rice paddies and the barrios beyond our home. And we often, as children, interacted with not only our American friends and schoolmates who lived in the same subdivision, but we also interacted, strangely, we call them the Filipino kids, and from the barrios. And so we often interact with them. They spoke English. During that time frame, I recall that my dad was also on temporary duty, often referred to as TDY, and we know that he was in Vietnam. He was sent to perform his duties in Vietnam. Most of that was not told to us. Much of that was classified. And while he was away, we had just my mom, and she often had jobs. She worked at the commissary when we were at Clark Air Base, and she worked there as a head cashier. Now, for us, depending upon which of those 2 schools, the afternoon or the morning school sessions, we would have our mom home for in the evenings, but we would also have time, depending upon extracurricular activities, whether we were playing sports in the afternoon, if we were in the morning school, and if we were in afternoon school, then we were usually just at our home when we lived in the American subdivisions outside of the air base. Very interesting aspect of that life off base is that we had a maid. It was really different for us because we had previously been a nuclear family, just our parents and us kids. In the Philippines, it was very customary to have a maid, and it was a type of service that seemed to be a very viable option because of the exchange rate between the U.S. dollar and the Filipino peso. So, for the modest incomes of our dad and our mom working as a head cashier at the commissary, they had income to be able to pay for a maid to live in with us. And so in our homes and in our subdivisions, particularly the second home we lived in, we had quarters that was part of our home. And so that it was very unusual for us because that wasn't our previous experience. But it was customary for American families living off base to have a maid. And when we moved on base, eventually our maid came to live with us there too. And so you had to go through all of the proper approvals for that to happen. It was very strange from our previous life before and then after we left the Philippines, afterwards to do our own housework. We were accustomed to doing that. But for that period of time in the Philippines, that was a luxury. So of that period of the late 60s, when there was such social upheaval in our country and consciousness about race and discrimination, we were very integrated in our schools. So it was unusual for us to have a lot of race issues. If anything, based upon our status as military dependents, that we had another dynamic working, and that was between officers' children and enlisted men's children. And our dad was a non-commissioned officer, an NCO, a sergeant. And so we were well aware of the kind of dynamics, the classism that we experienced between officers' children. We often refer to them as brats, and our enlisted, our peers who were children of enlisted men, usually NCOs, that were my mom and dad's peers. So eventually, while we lived there, we were involved in a lot of extra school activities, from sports. I remember playing Little League Baseball there, all three of us, brothers at that point. This is before Jason was born. So Jim, David, and I played baseball. And because we're brothers and we're always wrestling and fighting, your Nanee had this idea that we should learn martial arts to control and channel our energies. And so she got us into judo, which is known as the gentle way. And so we started to get into judo as well.
So Mom decided, because Dad was putting her in, quote unquote, from one, if you'd hear her say it, Dad was putting her into some weird places. And she knew she needed to defend herself. So well before us kids were even old enough, before we realized, Mom had taken on learning martial arts through the military. And so by the time us kids were old enough, Jerry, I, Norma, and we're in the early teens, You know, I was 9, 10, 11. Jerry and Norma 4, 8 years older than me, so they were appropriately aged. Just before Dad was get transferred over to the Philippines, Mom introduced us children into martial arts to protect ourselves. As we were beginning 60s, mid-60s, okay, let's say 1964, I think it was, when Jerry and I were introduced to judo through Mom. And at this time, Mom's a brown belt in judo in 64, 65. So she, as Jerry and I climbed up the ladder of the color of the belts, we realized she had been at it for a while to be a brown belt. She was an instructor for some of the local military and the commissary staff, the DOD staff, like Mom, that were traveling to train them to protect themselves. And of course, Mom introduced us to the classes, and Jerry, I, and David to do it like ducks to water, and also put us, you know, gave Mom and Dad an outlet for their 3 boys. We were angels on the mat. So that's where Mom, and we all hear her, oh, you know, I know your sweet spots. With her, I know your secret spots. I'm a judo brown belt, and she was. And I think there was one time in the Philippines where us kids, well, I don't remember if Jerry and Norma remember it, but I don't remember the events that led up to it. But it had to do some with us kids being rotten. But we weren't the only rotten kids. There were, for a lack of a better thing, my group of friends, our little gang, I guess, or little squad, because we were military brats. And the other group of kids, you know, I guess groups, cliques. But something transpired. Well, one of the dads came to the house all pissed off, and vintage mid-60s, I'm a military man, you can't tell me what to do. Dad's over in Vietnam. Mom's just getting home from work from being at the commissary. She has no idea what's going on, doesn't realize us kids have been this deep into crap with the neighborhood. This man comes barging into our yard and demanding and hollering and screaming, comes barging up, and Mom came home. She didn't have a good day. And not that she was, us kids knew that she didn't have a good day. We were kind of just chilling. And then this guy comes barging in, and next thing you know, Mom was like, boom, Irene. And yeah, don't you be in my face and accusing me. It was like, she was on. That was like the real first time I remember her being like, that's some judo shit. I watched her many a time when we finally moved back to the States, and Mom and Dad retired, and we came to the island and got to see her interact with some of her tribal members. And you know, I always thought it was kind of chuckle about it as I got older and went on with my life. And she would tell people when she'd get mad at somebody, oh, I'm a brown belt judo. And they always got my attention. Why the hell is she saying that? Somebody's about ready to get their ass kicked. And here's the sweet part to me, I think. Here it is now. And love you, Mom. She's a bit older, so I know she ain't going to be flipping me over her head. But in her mind, she still knows your secret spot.
You know, I'm a brown belt judo, and I still know your spot. And I think if like push would come to shove, some weird magic happens, she could probably take care of herself. Because she knows the secret spot.
I remember some of the family vacations that we would go to some beach resort areas. We also had time with our relatives and our Lola, Anna. And so she came to spend time with us, particularly when we lived in the off-base subdivisions.
I can remember the smells. I can almost taste them in my palate. The spices, the animals. I could hear the sounds. And similar sounds when we went to the Philippines later on in our life, when I was older, and I could put to memory the sounds, the smells, the taste when you're going through an open market in a third world. And because we weren't the quintessential American family in a foreign country, it opened up many more doors to us. So, you know, Jerry and I could literally roam these open markets in a third world without any repercussions. We could buy what we want for market value. So in the Philippines, it was centavos instead of pesos. Pennies to the dollar, in other words. And growing up with mom and dad, they gave us a food palette bar none. Oh my goodness. Between mom's cooking and dad's cooking, literally the East meets West is phenomenal. Going from being able to cook, a simple a fry bread, 3 ingredients, maybe 4 ingredients if you can afford the fourth one, fry bread, to like some of Dad's simple meals, a three ingredient, 1 pot meal that we all still to this day, like last night, I could cut up 4 pounds of pork and still not have enough. 6 cups of rice. We were lucky this time. We had a little extra because we overthought how much we needed. But this is like one of the first times that we had an overabundance of rice. One of the first times, we're talking 6 cups of rice. Until you make 6 cups of rice, that's a lot of rice. And my family can eat that. And that's just one helping. And it's that rice has always been like a base. Because with mom's cooking, I know I've learned and know how to make a wonderful pan sauce. Like the damn New England pan sauce. Even brown or white. To Dad's making a soya, like a teriyaki sauce. On either side, depending on what I want to. And that's something that I could never, ever imagine. Their ability to teach and them having the palate and like to cook. And not always did we like their lessons or methods on how that we learned how to cook.
So they like to barbecue, grill, cook Filipino food. That was always, once people figured out what lumpia was, my mom and dad always had friends. We always had friends. Once our friends were at our house and we had Filipino food, they always would ask for that. They were always, when are you going to have more lumpia? Being half Penobscot, half Filipino. I don't know. It was just who we were, and my mom and dad made sure that we knew both sides of our lineage and showed us how to be proud of who we are. They were always first and foremost to make sure that we knew who we are and where we came from.
During those times when my father was in the service, my mom ended up taking the civil servant exam, so she was able to work for the government in different aspects. And one of those was she was the head cashier at the commissary on the base, on several bases that we lived. So she was able to work through and then become like the manager, so to speak, in the commissary at every base that we worked at, until we moved to Missouri. And then she became, she didn't want to work in the commissary anymore, so she became head of finance at the local credit union on the military base. And that's where she was always good with money, and she'll tell you that she was always good with numbers. So I think that was her desire to, when my father finally retired, she got a job working for the IRS. So she would travel from Old Town, Maine down to Augusta and work for the IRS.
My mother always wanted to come home. My grandmother said she's like a salmon. One day she will swim back home, and we did actually end up back home. And when my dad retired from the Air Force, and it was amazing how her passion for our culture, our stories, our dances, our drumming, and our singing, it reinvigorated that when she came back home. And not only for our community here on Indian Island, she also reinvigorated that in the other communities. And when she would go to various ceremonies with other women, she would learn other songs, and she would bring those back. And I remember one in particular, she heard this song, and when she was away at ceremony, and it goes,
all my children, this is for you. Mother and all her children, give away to you.
And then I remember her singing that and drumming that, and then she came up with the chant. When she was inspired with the chant, it was so amazing. Her energy was amazing, and Mom sang,
Way-ya, hey-ya, way-ya, hey-ya, hey-ya, hey. Way-ya, hey-ya, way-ya, hey-ya, 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 hey. All my sisters, this is for you. Mother and all her children, give away to you.
when she ended her song, would always go. She loved doing that. And so at the end of the song, that wakes the spirit up. That lets the ancestors and everybody know that you have offered this song and your gift into the universe. And it's just so awesome.
And then until she got another job, and then she decided that she wanted to help the tribe. So she started to get involved with the tribe and then help set up their finance department, and she did a lot for other communities. So then she became involved with what they called Tribal Governors Incorporated, was shorthand TGI they called it, and it was based in Orono. But they did a lot of grants and contracts funding to get what they called the MIDA buses that would transport natives to and from Bangor, from the reservation into town, get their groceries, that kind of thing. So then the tribe, Old Town, the Penobscots were getting more funding, so they decided they were going to build a community center, but they needed somebody to get a finance department set up. So my mom helped set the finance department up on the Indian Island. And then she ran for council. She was elected into council for many terms. She served on council to try to help the tribe. And then they elected her the first woman and only woman lieutenant governor at the time, or what they would term now sub-chief. So she served in that capacity for a few years.
So my mom served as the first female lieutenant governor of Penobscot Nation. And in the modern time, that is, there historically have been males serving as the governors and lieutenant governors. And she served and was elected to be the first female to serve in that capacity. The office of lieutenant governor was one that was separately elected, meaning that not running on the same ticket with the governor. So they do not have to have the same political priorities and politics, but in this case it was aligned that she served as lieutenant governor at a time when her politics were aligned with the current governor, or the governor of that time. Having served in that position, it was also a daily office, and there was a place in our administration building, in the old community building, where the lieutenant governor had an office, and most respects served in the capacity as tribal administrator. The other duties involved serving in the absence of the governor, which could mean chairing a council meeting or representing our people, often in the absence or in the direction or as a directive of the governor. Since then, our tribe has changed the names of those political offices, which are now reflected in the titles chief and vice chief. Those are still closer to what our ancestors might have referred to our leaders in the sense of English words and terms, but our old title was Sogam. We didn't go that route. We then chose an English word instead of a word from our own tribal language.
And then she got done doing that, and then she decided that she wanted to go in a different direction, and then she went down to Bangor and worked with Wabanaki Public Health and helped them, and she was the one that started the Spring Social that they hold every year now. I think they're going on 20 plus years now. But she was the one that started that. She wanted to do a lot for their community and tried to bring a lot of that. Her and my dad worked together to try to help the community. They also, at the same time, opened a novelty shop called Chipula's Trading Post that originally started on the island in the teepee that my grandfather owned, and then later into Old Town on Main Street in 2 different locations. So at the time they worked in the store and they were busy, quite a bit. She had her hands in quite a bit of things going on. She was always busy, whether it be buying jewelry or people needed, traditional things, prayers done and, different traditional ritual kind of things done, sweats and, things like that. People were doing fasting and vision quests. She was always, even though she was raised Catholic, she also, when she went to Oklahoma, her family there was Baptist. She believed in traditional. She was just an all around, but she believed in something, and that she always has held true. You believe in something, she said. Everybody believes in something, whether it be named God or the Great Spirit or whatever, but, it didn't matter to her. She felt in her heart, and still feels in her heart, that, there's something grand out there, and no matter what it's called, that's what she prayed to.
Because I love the stories about, like, her making her dad do all this stuff and taking him everywhere and him being like, oh, okay, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like that kind of thing, because that's so, like,
Her.
Just, yeah,
That's
essentially
her character. She was always so busy doing everything she wanted, and he would always grumble. And then next thing you know, he would be telling everybody, isn't this grand idea? Like it was his idea, and he didn't doubt her at all. Like it was just the best thing in the whole world. But they both did. They both did in the community. I mean, he loved to cook, and he was always cooking. He'd volunteer for the barbecues, and everybody loved their food. They were always cooking, and so everybody, when they had a potluck, they'd, make sure George and Ann are bringing their Filipino food, and so, but they always, together, they were a great team.
Well, and from your perspective, because she's your mom, didn't she have you doing all sorts
Oh, yes. Yeah. There was not like we were, too busy to not participate in her crazy ideas. We were actually had to do the crazy idea with her. I said I can remember the numerous paper cuts on my tongue from licking envelopes until all of a sudden it was like, oh, you didn't get a sponge? And it was like, a sponge? What's the sponge for? Oh, you just dab it on the envelope. Oh, now you tell me, after the 1,000th box of envelopes that I like. And that was when she was running for council. That was just council. When she ran for lieutenant governor or sub-chief, then it was like all these mail-outs. We had to have these letters, stuff them in the envelope, and then it was crazy. But she was adamant that, she was doing this for the people. And whatever, anybody needed her, she was there, dragging my dad, dragging us kids all behind her.
I remember going to a pageant. I don't know if you have anyone talk to you about the dances. So our family very much performed in those pageants. And your Nanee would enlist us, basically tell us that we were going to dance in those. And so we danced, and we would go there. But I remember asking your Nanee, well, I don't know how to dance for sure. And so she says, oh, when you hear the drums, you'll know how. As something magical would happen, right? So definitely it was like anything, as a young person, you learn by watching and then imitating. And of course, we got it. So she didn't take the trouble of teaching us as much as taking us to places where we could watch, learn, and figure it out. One of my funniest experiences, or humorous experience, I'll just say, is that one year that Sugarloaf Ski Resort was having a great deal of challenges because of the low amount of snow, and so somehow someone there at Sugarloaf had this idea of arranging for a snow dance. Now, on one level today, from our 21st century sense of respect and of decorum, you wouldn't likely do what Sugarloaf did or what we agreed to. But your Nanee agreed that our family would go over and do a snow dance. And as strange as it may seem, and how stereotypical and that the notion would be, she agreed. So we all go over there, we're staying at the Sugarloaf Resort, we come out there, the big to-do about this snow dance. And we did it. And fate was, call it whatever you will, there was a snowstorm that came.
So we would go down the regalia. We had some that we had made, but a lot of them, I don't want to say hand-me-downs or anything, but there was a setup for us that had been made previously, remade, and or not remade, but updated and maintained. So it was kind of cool that these were already used for shows. And then some of our regalia was definitely more Kiowa themed than Penobscot themed. So that might have led some people to get confused. But then when my mom, Anne Irene, the lady of the hour, she would be first and foremost and tell the lineage, so they knew that our regalia reflected her Kiowa roots as well. But when within the United States, you have to choose which tribe you're from, and her parents being her father Kiowa and her mother Penobscot. Traditional way, you go with the mother. So our clan, she was Penobscot. So, and that's where she grew up. So that's why our regalia was Western themed.
And at one point, after my mom and dad had retired from being in the service, they'd opened a store down in Old Town. It was they sold traditional things, books, jewelry, various things, and it was so cute that. And then they'd have their lunch in town, and my father would say, "Your mother talks with everybody for 20 or 30 minutes, and really spreads the history, and she loves doing that. And then the last few minutes, I get to sell him something." he would always let mom talk, and he was very patient with my mom in terms of that, and that comes from them working together, over the years at the various spaces that we had been.
So my name is Gavin. Anne is my grandmother, and Lisa is my mother. My immediate family is Lisa and Tim. Those are my parents. My younger brother Justin, and the dog and cat Dobby and Leia. Years ago, when I was a kid, probably around 10, we had a dog called Mooin. Yeah, that's been like my immediate family for like most of my life. Most of my life. So anyway, I was born in 1996. I was born in Bangor, Maine. I grew up, kind of my first few years were in the Old Town area, and then after that I spent most of my childhood and adolescence in Green, Maine, and then later on, my family ended up moving to Tennessee, and so, yeah, I've kind of lived back and forth between Tennessee and Maine for the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. So yeah, so as a young kid, I would say in the late 90s, I don't remember much, unfortunately, but I do recall spending a lot of time with my grandparents. I called them Nanee and Papa. The rest of my family does not call them that. Everybody always called them Grampy and Grammy. For whatever reason, I started calling them whatever I wanted to call them, and true to form, they sort of just embraced that. And my Nanee actually came up with the spelling of her name, Nanee, that we use today and have used since I could talk. So, I mean, the only two people that call her that are my brother and I, and my brother, of course, calls her that because I call her that. So yeah, so I don't really remember it, but I know that I spent a lot of time with my grandparents at their store. My grandfather was a very clean person, so he often had me, cleaning things in the store, moving things around for him. And my mom told me that I even had my own little place to nap under the counter. He made me like a little pallet sort of thing to lay down on. So, while he and I would be hanging out around the store, or I guess, sometimes he would even take me out for lunch or during breakfast time, whatever. My grandmother would be in the back of the store managing all of the, business side of things. So, like, taking care of the books and whatnot. As my mom said, she was always really good with numbers, and she would even tell you that was sort of, that was always her thing. So, I did spend a lot of time with them. I spent a lot of time with them at their house, which is actually where I am right now. This is my bedroom that I'm in right now, but it was my grandmother and grandfather's bedroom at one time. In the late 90s, late 90s, my grandfather did pass away, and shortly thereafter, my mom and I ended up moving in with my grandmother, and we all lived together in this house. And that's sort of where my memory starts in my life, is living here with my mom and my Nanee. And from what I can remember, it was actually a lot of fun. My grandmother was such a fun person to be around, and I think from the moment that I can remember, I loved listening to her stories and listening to her talk. And I remember, my mom worked a lot, my Nanee worked a lot too, but with my Nanee, I remember spending a lot of time with her in the breakfast nook downstairs by the kitchen. While her and my mom cooked. But with my Nanee, we played a lot of games together. She loved playing cards. Again, she was really good with numbers. So I think she had a hand in teaching me how to count as well. But, we played a lot of games like Go Fish, Memory, things like that. I remember playing a lot with my Nanee. And, my mom, she was going back to school at the time, I believe, and I, would hang out with her at school, and I would hang out with her. I don't know, we actually used to go visit my stepfather, who she was dating at the time, and he lived in Jay, Maine. And we eventually moved out of here, though we would still come back and visit with my Nanee. We eventually moved out of here, and we moved in with my stepfather after my mom graduated from college. And we lived in a little apartment in Jay, Maine. And that was also really fun. I remember, riding my bike all over the place in the area we lived in, playing in the fields by the apartment we lived in. I remember that being a lot of fun as a little kid. And around that time, I think I would have been around 5 or 6. I also remember spending a lot of time with my Nanee going to different places. She often took me to like different gatherings, and in that time frame, I also remember sitting in the back of her car, and I remember she had like this little beige car. This was on the way to and from wherever we were going. But she had a little beige car, and it smelled like sweetgrass, I remember, because in the rear view window area, she had like a braid of sweetgrass in my grandfather's hat, or one of my grandfather's like baseball caps. And she would listen to Neil Young over and over and over again. She loved Neil Young, particularly the song Harvest Moon. And as a young kid, after a while, I did not want to continue to listen to Neil Young, so I would ask her, hey, Nanee, can we listen to something else? Not right now. Not yet, not right now. And then we would just continuously listen to that Neil Young CD over and over and over again. But she also would listen to my music when I got a little bit older, and I started buying my own CDs. She would be like, yeah, put whatever CD you have, put it in the CD player. I want to hear it. And she would listen to it with me, and I don't know, she always seemed to like it. If it was good music, she liked it. She just really loved good music. So yeah, she loved Neil Young, but she also loved like Bob Marley, different, country music artists. My parents always listened to like alternative rock. She would sit there and listen to that too. It never seemed to bother her. So, yeah, there was always that as well. At these gatherings that she would go to, I remember there were, of course, always a lot of people, and my Nanee always participated in the drumming and the singing, and she socialized with everybody. And I was a very shy child. As an adult, still, I'm not very talkative. But especially as a child, I was very, very shy. And she would always try to like push me, go talk to the kids, go play with the kids. And I was always like, no, I'm not going to do that. So she would eventually just give up and let me sit with her. And so I would listen to her talking to a lot of the adults at these gatherings. And I think that was always interesting, to listen in on the conversations and kind of hear, some of the stuff they'd been up to culturally, the issues that they would talk about. I always found it interesting. When we lived in Greene, I remember she would come and visit us all the time. She was with us all the time. And, there were times where she would even live with us for months at a time. But I think what I remember specifically is, yes, she would spend holidays with us, Thanksgiving, Christmas, things like that, and that was always really fun, especially her cooking. That was like, one of my other favorite things about my Nanee was her cooking. I don't think, my mom's cooking is incredible too, but my Nanee, she was a great cook. And helping her with dinner was also, that was a whole nother thing. I wouldn't say that she was like impatient. I feel like she was a very patient person for the most part, at least with me, and her grandkids. But in the area of cooking, perhaps not so much, right? So if you didn't really know how to do something, or you didn't just use your common sense to figure out how you were gonna cook something or how you were gonna prepare something, she would get annoyed, and she would tell you, get out of the way. I'll do it. Just let me do it. And you would have to be like, okay, sorry. I'll wait. I'll watch you. I'll talk with you while you cook. And she was always fine with that with me. Was just talking with me while she was cooking, and I would kind of hang out and sit with her. And we also, something that her and I like to do specifically, she loved the Golden Girls, and admittedly, so did I. I thought that show was hilarious. I still do. And so during dinner and after dinner, we would watch the Golden Girls together. So yeah, I remember her being with us quite a bit. And I think some of the times that I remember, some of the things that stand out to me the most are sitting with her outside in the summertime around the campfire. My family, like my immediate family, my mom and Tim, my stepdad, my brother and I, our thing was kind of like just sitting outside by the fire. That's like something we always loved to do. Sitting outside by the fire and talking. And my grandmother also loved doing that. And I remember sometimes it would just be the two of us, if everybody had gone to bed or if everybody was elsewhere. I don't know. I just remember the two of us sitting there, and she would tell me stories about all kinds of things. All of the different places she went. Her mom. I remember she used to tell me a lot of stories about her mom and her grandparents, her dad, her siblings. All of these amazing stories. And it was funny because I remember my parents used to joke with her and be like, "Are you, telling tall tales again, Nanee?" She'd be like, "No, this really happened." And it's funny now because we all know now, yeah, all of those things did actually happen. But that's just, that was her life. She did so many cool things and saw so many cool things and crazy things and knew so many different people that it was almost hard to believe at times, but it was all true. And I as a kid, you loved listening to those stories, or at least I did. I loved hearing about all that stuff. And there were different stories too where she would be like, "Never tell anyone that I told you this." And it's like, I won't say it here now, but it was about different things regarding like our culture, or different stories that we have culturally. And I really value those, and I'm so glad that I have them now as an adult and that I heard them as a child. I want to say probably the summer that stands out the most to me, where she was at our house for pretty much that entire summer. I think it was from the spring into the fall. She lived with us, and I remember spending so much time with her because I was 13 at the time. So it was just me and her at home all day, every day, for that whole summer. And we kind of just hung out. We watched TV together, we sat outside together, swam in the pool together, cooked dinner together before my parents got home. And it was nice. Yeah, I just remember it being really nice to have my Nanee there for that amount of time. And the thing about my Nanee and I, our relationship, was that we loved to joke around together as much as, the thing is too, is like, I love listening to her stories, but she also listened to me. So if I was telling her a story, I was telling her something that I was thinking about, something that was going on with me in my life as a kid. She listened to me too. you know. She really, I feel like that's a quality you don't really see that often in very many people, is the willingness and ability to just listen to what other people have to say. And that was something that she always did with us, is she made time for us, first of all, and second, she would listen to us when we had something to say. So I really value that, and I've tried to take that with me into my own life. Everybody has something to say, everybody's important, so, you know, don't just talk, but also listen. And, you know, one thing about my Nanee that I always loved was that a lot of the stories she would tell, a lot of the things she would say, I think depending on your age and, you know, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of different factors, but whatever she felt that you needed to hear, however she gauged that, she would tell you different stories depending on those things, you know, what she felt that you might need to hear from her. And I always thought that was really cool. I definitely noticed that listening to her talk to other people, that, you know, depending on someone's age, depending on, you know, what they were doing in their life, she might tell them different stories. So different stories for different groups of people. But yeah, I always thought that was really cool. You know, and there was one time, even as a kid, I remember going to go see the movie Bridge to Terabithia with my cousins, and my Nanee took us to go see that movie. And, you know, an aside here, but my Nanee took me to go see so many different movies. We were always going to the movies together. I think she's part of the reason why I love movies so much, her and my mom, really. But part of the reason why I love movies so much and why I could sit down as a child and watch a movie is because I just loved watching them with my Nanee, with my mom, but, you know, with my Nanee, we really just sat there together, enjoyed each other's company, and watched a movie. But yeah, so she took me and my cousins to go see that movie, and if you are familiar with the movie or the book, it's very sad. And so all of us were crying, and, you know, on the way home, she's like trying to console us, like, it's gonna be okay, you guys, you know, I know it's sad, but it'll be alright. I remember reading the book as well. It was actually around the time the movie came out, which it didn't happen on purpose, but as a class, we were reading the book. I think I was in like the 5th grade when the movie came out. We were reading the book, we read the book, saw the movie, but I remember as I was reading the book, after I finished it, I really liked it, and I remember telling my Nanee that, you know, I was like, oh, I'm reading this book, I really like it, it's Bridge to Terabithia, and she asked to borrow it. So I let her borrow it, she borrowed my copy, she read it, and then I remember she gave it back to me, and she told me, you know, that was a really good book, I really liked it. You're right, it was a good book. So, I don't know, that kind of always sticks out to me, because I don't know anybody in my life that would take the time to be like, oh, that's your favorite book? Let me read it, and then give it back to you and tell you that I liked it. You know? That's what I mean by she was so busy, she had so much to do. She was always doing something, but she always made that time for the people that she loved and cared about, and there's a lot of us, so she, you know, she really, I really don't know how she did it, but she did, and I feel like she always made each of us feel that we were important and special, and that we at least had one person in our corner, and for me that was my Nanee, and I think for a lot of us it's, you know, the same. So yeah, and then in 2012 my family ended up moving to Tennessee, like I said, and even when we lived in Tennessee, she would come and visit for you know, several months, probably 6 to 8 months. Sometimes she would live with us or stay with us, and that was awesome too. You know, towards 2013, 2014, well, actually in 2014 I moved in with her, but, you know, like I mentioned, I kind of bounced back and forth between Tennessee and Maine, and so sometimes we live together here, and sometimes we live together at my mom's house. But I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with her over the last decade. And around that time, she, you know, was showing more signs of dementia and whatnot, but, you know, listening to her stories still, you know, she would often repeat them, and I guess the bright side of that, hearing her stories so often was that now I know them by heart. I could say them all, and I know them all really well. But like I said, I got to spend a lot of time with her. I got to see her every day, and I don't know, do all sorts of things with her. I got to sit and color with her and watch movies with her, and you know, at my mom's house, we were always hanging out, watching hockey. You know, I'm a big Bruins fan, so I watched every single game, and she was sitting there with me, watching every single game with me. So yeah, I mean, my Nanee and I, we have so many memories together, and I'm so lucky to be able to say that she is my Nanee, that she was my Nanee, and yeah, she was just the best.
I think the universal thing is love. Love.
My mother was a fantastic lodge keeper. She had gone through ceremony and earned her pipe, and she always wanted to be able to have a sweat ceremony that would help in the healing. My mother was specific about the sweats in that people had to be at a good place, and that she preferred to do sweats just with women, and that's okay. And it was amazing. And my mother's sweat, um, you know, that the time stood still, and it was just that energy. There are only a few sweats that I've been in, and my mother's in particular, where time stood still. We thought we were in the sweat for maybe 45 minutes, and hours had passed. Not only time, but space. That little small lodge that we were in expanded to feel like a very big part of the universe. Um, and and that promoted the healing. She did not take that upon herself to say, well, let me heal you with this ceremony. No, she would say, we're going to have this ceremony, and we're all going to be together, and the healing will come. And it was amazing. And how many people that had attended those sweats that my mother had been the lodge leader for, you know, have lived and changed their lives and made so many different, gifts back to their community, and it's just amazing. And I think that is part of her legacy, that in a humble way, she shared what was very important to her and made a difference in our communities and for a lot of people. And I'm very, very thankful that she was my mom, and she had that very awesome quality to do that in a very down-to-earth way. And she's hopefully she will get credit for that somewhere at some point. But we always, admired her for the many things that she's done and that she's contributed.
So there are a number of things two things I have reflected on. And one of those is what we had grown up with, and hearing the stories about our family here in Maine, and also from New Brunswick, Canada. So we do have the lineage from Lustigway or Maliseet and Bunawapskawi or Penobscot. We'd have both lineages that she would speak about, and also our Kiowa relatives, and so that she would often talk about family members, many of them had passed, and tell us these stories. And we had learned a lot, or at least I recall trying to put these genealogies in some order. It seemed to be complicated, and I was trying to place our relatives and our ancestors in some kind of chart, and then put the stories in the chart with them. And it just seemed very complicated, and that your Nanee would talk about these, and over time that her stories became more real to me, particularly after we moved back here to Indian Island or Old Town and living in this area, and having place and identity, a physical as well as an emotional identity. So living away for the years that we did while your grandpa was in the Air Force, about 10, 12 years, that this was always home. Well, we always heard about the stories, and we would come back in the summers and spend your grandpa's 30-day leave here, and we would come back here, and over time putting the stories and the names and the places into an understandable picture. And now I can say that your Nanee's stories are now incorporated and a foundation of my own stories of place and identity.
One of my memories of Mom and Dad taking us outdoors. Like I said, I was just a little guy. I don't remember how old, but I remember going there, and we had picnic baskets, ash picnic baskets, and Mom would make fried chicken, or they would bring hamburger patties already made, wrapped in wax paper, potato salad, coleslaw, and a pie or something, or like Jerry and I loved it. I remember like the 13 by 9 inch cakes, and they would make a cake in it, one layer, cut it up in little chunks, and that all went into that basket with Kool-Aid. You know, Mom always had Kool-Aid. Oh, and there was always a jar, a mason jar, maybe a quart to a half gallon, of warm soapy water with a washcloth in it. Oh my goodness. And I don't think there's not one of us, you included, that aren't constantly washing or wiping. It comes from that damn mason jar. Mom, infamous, when we go out, when she used to take us to the park or out into the forest, always have food. Her and Dad, one of the lessons about being outdoors, a lot of times you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to use what you have to do what you need. You don't have to make a wheel again, you know. Those are the some of the cherished memories. I mean, was it a true lesson? But I absorbed it and it was like, is this the lesson, or is she teaching me how to think to get through this? And like with Dad, it teaching me how to swim, and not all my knowledge of what is in the woods Mom taught me at this age, but it was just over time and the little things that she showed or I was involved with, because can't say she showed me. Same with Grammy. Can't say she showed me because I was involved with it.
She would encourage me. She would give me candy and go try to make friends with the other kids. And I was always so scared that they weren't going to like me, and she would pretty much force me, not bodily, but pretty much push me over there to try to make friends. So she would always give me, and I can remember that's the first time that I'd ever been given Peeps, and that was how I made friends. So whenever I see Peeps, I think of, oh, I'm going to go make some friends today. I said, so it's like funny because all of my family love Peeps. But that's how it all started. She wouldn't let me just sit and be by myself. She encouraged me to go out and want to make friends. So when I tell people that at one time I was shy, they can't believe it either. And it's all because of her. I said my family wouldn't believe me now if I ever told them that I was shy at one time.
So just me and my mom. There is one cool story with just me and my mom. We were gonna go canoeing. She had promised me if it was nice out, we can go out on a river in a canoe, because when we were living down street at the teepee, my dad had built a dock, so we had stairs down in the dock, and we would launch the canoe. And it was a beautiful summer day. So then we were paddling upriver on the shoreline. I was in the front, she was steering. But when we got to the head of the island, all of a sudden the water was weird. It was like it was boiling. And it was that time of the year where from Indian Island up around Orson towards the Stillwater section, the river flows back on itself and goes upriver during that time. It happens I don't know if it's at least in that time of year in the fall. I don't know, it happens in the spring. So there's times of the year that the river goes back on itself right there. And we just happened to be paddling that day, and it was all weird, and I was pissed off being a little kid that she was like, this is weird, we got to turn around because the current's taking us away that's not supposed to go. And I didn't realize that because I was young. I might have been 8 or 10 at the time. And then years later, when I understood the river, that's what was going on. And that was like one of my first lessons of, yes, we're out here to have fun, but you got to be safe in all the situations. Always err on the side of safety, and usually you'll be okay. So after that, we didn't go right home, but we just didn't go up into that section when the current was changing. So that was a pretty cool memory with us two in a canoe together.
I love you bunches. When I see you again, I'm going to hug the hell out of you. Love you all.